Hello YouTube and welcome back to Old Maryland 63 C10. This is episode 12 in our rebuild process, and in today's episode we are taking all of our suspension parts to the powder coater to get everything cleaned up and powder coated. So stick around. Okay everybody, just a note, I wanted to let everyone know that the product I got back from Mt Airy Coating, who I use to do my powder coating, is fantastic. I couldn't be happier with the parts I got back, and Carl and Eric at Mt Airy Coating couldn't be easier to work with. I'm going to include a link to their website in the description, and I'm just kind of throwing this in the beginning of the video because I know a lot of times on YouTube when you're scrolling you don't always make it to the end. We'll talk more about the product when we obviously get there, but I just wanted to say in the very beginning I could not be happier with the work of the guys at Mt Airy Coating. So let's get back to the video. Okay, so before we head out, let's take a look at all the parts we have that needs to go to powder coating. First, we have the frame already on the trail, and then we have our rear housing. Right now, I've got the cover bolted to it. I'm not sure if the powder coater is going to want to take that off. I don't know if they would want it on to protect either the inside a little bit when they go to glass bead it, but we've broken everything loose as far as the braking components and everything stripped off. Next thing we have is the dust plates for the front disc brakes. These are my spindles in here. I'm not going to send the calipers, and I'm not going to send the actual discs themselves because they said it would be really time consuming and a pain to be able to try to tape off enough of the disc surface. So I'm just going to take care of that and paint it myself. And the calipers with the rubber, I guess the rubber seals inside, they didn't want to put it through the oven. So in this box we have our control arm bushings and the sleeve for the tie rod ends, and I have the little clips too, so I'm going to hopefully get them powder coated. And then this is just a few other parts. So we have the cutouts for the exhaust, the motor mounts, the rear axle plates, the clutch bracket, and then that's the emergency brake cable lever, I guess you would call that. Then we have both sets of A-arms, the two trailing arms. And over here we've got the center tie rod link for the suspension. So these are all the parts we have that we're going to send out to have powder coated. Again, the springs, my new springs, the track arm, and several other pieces are already essentially coated, so obviously I'm not going to send those off. But these are the old pieces that we had as we tore apart the frame and the suspension. And we'll go ahead and get this loaded up and we'll head on out. Okay, and here we are pulling into Mt Airy Coatings is the name of the company that we're using. It's right in Mt Airy, Maryland. There's the sign. And this is where we'll go in and talk to them about getting our frame coated. Here's our pile all unloaded. I just talked to Carl here at Mt Airy Coatings. Very easy to work with. And I think the frame and the trailing arms and the rear axle are going to go to a sandblaster to use because it's a little bit bigger setup. But other than that, everything is here on this pallet for Hank. He said he'd let me know when the sandblaster is going to do the work because I might go down there and film a little bit. And he also said when they go to do their coatings here, they'd reach out and I might be able to film some here as well to see how they do their process. So we're back here at Mt Airy Coatings. They let me come back and take a look at some of the things that they're working on for my truck. So just wanted to kind of walk everybody through some of the process. I'm gonna talk to the guy who's doing most of the coating, Eric, in a minute, but I wanted to give you some video of our parts as they're getting prepped for powder. So the frame of the truck has been sandblasted. It's taken down the bare metal. There are a few spots that Eric is going to work a little bit more on as far as getting it cleaned up, but it's basically hanging here on the rack and getting ready to be cleaned up, and then they put a primer on and then they do the powder, and the texture is coarse. It almost feels like maybe a 120, 100 grit sandpaper. And they want that texture on there so that the primer can then stick and the powder has something to grab onto. As you can see, there's a couple spots that they need to clean up, and I'll say that Eric is being very diligent about making sure the frame is perfect before they start their process. So they're actually going to have the person that does the sandblasting come back out and hit it again. And I will say I really appreciate his thoroughness in looking over my parts. So then back here, we have the rear end that I think is just about ready to go. You can see he ground down a bunch of the spots where it had welding slag on it. So it'll be all ready to go. Over here we have our A-arms clean. Now these are all been glass beaded, so the process is a little bit different than the sand, I guess, on the frame. They're not quite as coarse, but you can definitely feel the texture on it. Of course, my center link, spindles. And here's a pile of my miscellaneous parts. The exhaust cutouts, the shackles for the rear, bushings, they need to be blasted, but they're going soon. This is emergency brake bracket, and then the dust covers. And here's one of my motor mounts that's still in the process, and one of them has already been blasted. So we'll take a look at what he's doing. Coming back over to the rear, they did tell me that they will use either tape or something to cover up the holes where the gaskets and the bearings will ride. So this will be closed up so the powder doesn't get in there. On the back side of the rear, they'll tape up where the gasket will ride. And as you can see here, he's done more grinding to just kind of clean everything up to make it nice and smooth when the powder goes on. So this has been sitting for a while, so you can see just a little bit of haze of rust. But again, after all this grinding that is done to kind of take off the sharp edges, he's going to put it back in the cabinet and then re-blast it so that it'll all be basically the same texture he was saying, so that the powder will grab all of it. That trailing iron came out all blasted. This one's probably pretty close and ready to go. So after Eric had knocked down all the rough spots and we're left with some of the shiny metal here, he runs it all through the blaster to get it all consistently back to the same texture. So this one's getting ready to go in next. So originally I was not going to have my cross member removed because I was a little bit worried about getting it back in the frame correctly and not having an issue with suspension. But after talking with Eric, I'm glad I did, because you can see how much gunk and old crap and crud is inside of the cross member. So we went ahead and took it loose and got it off the frame. He's already started working the edges, and he'll put this in the glass feeder and get all these inner surfaces here that would have been basically buried under the powder. So glad they convinced me to do it. I think it'll turn out and give us a much better product. This rack of pieces are ready to get the first stage of the process. It's already been glass beaded. They've been kind of rounded on the edges. He's kind of straightened those out, re-glass beaded again. And now they're getting ready to get wash down before going into the oven to dry, and then get the primer coat. So we're going to switch to voiceover because I think the shop's a little loud. In this shot, Eric is washing down all the pieces and spraying off all the dust and anything that's still in the metal. I was a little surprised when we were blasting it with water on bare metal, but he said the water just kind of cleans off, and then in this part, it gets an iron phosphate added to the water. So you can start to see the pieces get a little bit of foam on them, almost looks like suds. And the iron phosphate, when it gets baked, it does some type of etching to the metal that allows the primer to stick a little better. And it also adds a little protective coating to it that actually, if the powder gets chipped, it'll help prevent the piece from rusting. So it does a couple things. Again, it gives a little bit of the iron phosphate etches the metal and gives a little bit of covering in case it chips and it won't rust. So these are the wet pieces going into the oven. I think they baked for about maybe 10 or 15 minutes to dry them off and let the iron phosphate etch into the metal. Eric kind of has this down where he's got the next set ready for the wash down. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes to do that. So while one rack is in drying, the other rack is having something done to it, whether it's the wash down or the primer or the final coat. So here's the second rack after washing. It's getting ready to go in the oven and, bake again off a little bit until it completely dries. Again, this part, I think he said it was about 10 or 15 minutes usually in the oven to dry everything off. Here he's washing down the cross member, and I am really glad, as I said before, that I'm glad we took this off. You probably can't see as much on the floor there, but there was so much junk and crud coming out from this cross member. It was unbelievable. When it was on the frame, you didn't see most of it because, again, it just blasted what you could see, but obviously couldn't blast where you couldn't see. So again, this was a good move. If other people are having this done, I think most people do take the cross members off. I have to say I was probably just a little nervous about it. But if you do it, I would take the cross member off. This is the first rack coming out after the iron phosphate and wash down. And you can sort of see the metal's a little bit darker gray. Not sure the camera's picking up it really well, but the metal has a little bit of a brown tint to it. And it's basically the iron phosphate has, again, coated the metal, did what it was going to do chemically, I suppose, and added a little bit of protection and etched the metal in order for the primer to be able to stick better. So the next step after this will be the first primer coat that'll go on the pieces. So here's the primer going on. I have to say I knew powder coating was obviously a powder, but I didn't realize how, I guess, fine of a powder it was. It kind of looks like it just floats there in the air a little bit, and it gets sucked up very easily into the ventilators or the fans, whatever you want to call it, behind the piece here. And like I said, Eric's just taking his time going through all the different angles of the pieces, spinning them around, make sure they're getting a good coat. And you can see it's almost like a dust. I knew the powder coating was, again, powder, but I didn't realize it was that fine of a, like I said, a dust. To me, it looks more like a dust. So getting all the sides and angles of the lower control arm here. And then after this is actually a little tiny vacuum that he uses, and he vacuums out all the surfaces where, in this case, where the ball joint's going to go, where something's going to thread into it. So on some of the other pieces where there's threaded bolts or where, bolts with thread in, he's vacuumed that all out. He's going to do inside here where the steel bushing threads into it. Did it on the gasket surfaces, so basically to not get any powder in areas where we don't want it, where something else is going to mate up to it, whether it's a gasket or a bolt. So now this is the rack going in for the primer, and I think he said the primer usually goes in for a good 20 minutes. So it's a little bit longer than just, drying it out from the first run. And this is what the first rack looks like when it comes out with the primer all finished. It's it looks pretty good just like this. And in fact, I said to him, I almost wish I was just getting it done in a very light gray because I was ready to take this stuff home. I mean, it looks really good. And again, this is just the primer phase of it. And as you can see, when you get a little closer here to this lower control arm, you can see where the bare metal is still there, where he vacuumed it out. And it's a pretty straight line where the powder coated and where the bare metal is. And this is the other rack of parts coming out after they had been baked. And again, I think the primer is about 20 minutes, where the water spray to just dry things out was about 10 or 15. So now we finally get some color going. And again, pretty much the same process as before, just kind of get every surface coated. The powder, again, very fine, comes out, and he works his way all the way through the control arm. And then we'll eventually use the same little tool to vacuum out all the spots where we actually don't want powder. Again, in this case on the A-arm, where the bushing threads in and where the lower ball joint gets pressed into the control arm. So he's going to finish this one up, and you get to see some of the final product before I bring it home. So take a look. Got all my parts off the trailer. Again, couldn't be happier with how things turned out. Got the spindles unwrapped, the center drag link, and the dust covers for the disc brakes. And I mean, the front of the frame itself is just as smooth as it can be. Like I said, I left it still kind of wrapped up in the center there because it's sitting on my dollies, just to make it easier to roll around the shop until we're ready to get everything going back together. My lower A-arms, again, I left them in the wrapping because they will go with me along with the rear, because I'm going to take them to a machine shop and have the rear set up, and I'm going to probably take the A-arms and the trailing arms there to be able to press bearings in and ball joints and those kind of things. So I'm just going to leave them wrapped up to be able to travel a little bit better. The center cross or the front cross member, again, really glad they convinced me to take that out. It looks great. Again, I'm leaving that wrapped up until I'm just ready to start to put it back into the frame. Again, with the frame, Eric really took his time and just took all the sharp edges off of everything, smoothed everything out, and it is about as smooth as a button right now. So it looks great. I mean, it looks like it's brand new and ready to get assembled from the factory. So couldn't be happier with that. And then we can go over, just a little bit of the rear there. That's all cleaned and shiny and ready to go, ready to get assembled. And we can go over, and here's a bunch of small parts. So the upper A-arm, again, the other one's still wrapped up. I just got this one out to be able to see my motor mounts, upper control arm bushings, the sleeves for the tie rod ends, the shock mounts for the rear end, the bracket that goes underneath the rear, lower control arm bushings, and then the cutouts for the exhaust and emergency brake and clutch pedal bracket. Again, couldn't be happier how these things turned out. So let's get this video wrapped up and talk about what's next. So that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing the frame and all the parts go from rusty and crusty to nice and clean and coated. Again, can't say enough about Mt Airy Coatings. If you're in the area and are looking for somebody to do some work for you, please look those guys up. Did a great job. Carl and Eric couldn't be better to work with. So hope you like our video. If you're interested in seeing Hank go back together, please like and subscribe. Our next video, we're going to start working on the rear end and getting the rear suspension back under the truck. So that's next. So thanks for watching.